We tend to look back at the Roman Empire as this inevitable force of nature. When you picture Rome, you see the legions, the marble columns, the roads stretching across the known world. It feels like they were destined to win. But history isn't actually a straight line, and empires don't just rise because fate chose them. Usually they rise because they got lucky or because their rivals made a fatal mistake. Before Rome was the master of the Mediterranean, it was actually the underdog. It lived in the shadow of a superpower that was older, richer, and significantly more sophisticated. This was a city that didn't build its power on blood and soil, but on profit and capital. A city that ran its empire less like a kingdom and more like a multinational corporation. That city was Carthage, and the story of how Carthage almost strangled Rome in its crib isn't really a military story, it's an economic one. To really get what happened here, you have to throw away the standard textbook version where Carthage is just a footnote. Carthage was the first true economic titan Rome ever faced. While Rome was still figuring out how to organize a government, Carthage had already turned the entire Mediterranean Sea into its private marketplace. Founded by Phoenician settlers, these guys were masters of three things: the sea, logistics, and the deal. They didn't care about conquering vast stretches of empty land. They cared about choke points. They controlled the harbors, the shipping lanes, and the coasts of Sicily, Sardinia, and Spain. They had this incredible double harbor in their capital, one for commercial ships and a hidden circular one for war, that was basically the ancient equivalent of an industrial assembly line. They could build and repair fleets faster than anyone else could even cut down the trees. Rome, on the other hand, was a heavy, slow, land-based farming society. Its economy was simple. You own land, you farm it, you fight to protect it. For a long time, these two worlds didn't collide. The sharks stayed in the water, and the wolves stayed on land. But the Mediterranean is a cramped place, and eventually two growing economies are going to want the same real estate. That real estate was Sicily. It wasn't just an island. It was the gateway to the east and a massive grain producer. If you controlled Sicily, you controlled the global economy. Rome wanted it for security. Carthage wanted it for revenue. And that friction sparked the First Punic War. This is where the difference in their business models became obvious. Carthage fought with its wallet. They didn't have a massive citizen army. Instead, they hired the best talent money could buy: Numidian cavalry, Spanish infantry, Greek specialists. It was a gig economy military. As long as the treasury was full, Carthage could project power without risking its own citizens. It was efficient. It kept the trade flowing. Rome, however, was fighting with its own people. When a Roman soldier died, that was a citizen, a father, a farmer. But Rome had something Carthage didn't: an insane level of stubbornness and social cohesion. When Rome realized they couldn't win without a navy, they didn't just give up. They found a wrecked Carthaginian ship, reverse-engineered it, and built a fleet from scratch using loans from private citizens. It was the first time we see Rome using credit to fight a war. Carthage lost that first round, not because they were bad soldiers, but because their model had a glitch. When the war ended and Carthage tried to negotiate lower pay for its mercenaries, the mercenaries revolted. The gig economy army turned on its masters. Rome watched this chaos and learned a valuable lesson. Money buys soldiers, but it doesn't buy loyalty. But Carthage was resilient. They pivoted. Under the leadership of Hamilcar Barca and later his son Hannibal, they moved into Spain to seize the silver mines. They needed hard cash to rebuild. The Barca family essentially ran Spain like a private fiefdom, generating massive amounts of silver to fund a new war machine. And this brings us to Hannibal. We all know the story: the elephants, the Alps, the genius tactics. But we need to look at Hannibal differently. He wasn't just a general. He was an economic weapon. His plan wasn't to siege Rome itself. He knew he couldn't take the city. His plan was to break Rome's bank. Hannibal rampaged through Italy for over a decade. His goal was to sever Rome's alliances, burn their farms, and destroy the tax base. He wanted to make the cost of war so high that Rome's confederation would go bankrupt and collapse. He was waging financial attrition, and honestly, it almost worked. Rome was bleeding money. Their manpower was decimated. After the Battle of Cannae, where Hannibal wiped out tens of thousands of Romans in a single afternoon, the markets panic. In any other era, the state would have folded. But this is where the Roman system proved superior to the Carthaginian one. Carthage relied on liquidity, cash on hand. Rome relied on solvency, the ability to absorb pain and keep going. Rome raised taxes, they devalued their currency, and most importantly, the wealthy elite doubled down. They loaned their personal fortunes to the state. They refused to let the company go under. It was a level of economic patriotism that Carthage couldn't match because Carthage was run by merchants who were constantly calculating profit and loss. The Carthaginian Senate was hesitant to send Hannibal reinforcements because it was bad for business. They treated the war like a risky investment they wanted to hedge against. Rome treated the war like an existential necessity. Eventually, Rome found its own genius in Scipio Africanus. Scipio realized that you don't beat a commercial empire by fighting its armies. You beat them by cutting off their revenue. He didn't go straight for Hannibal in Italy. He went to Spain. He captured New Carthage, seized the silver mines, and cut off the cash flow. Suddenly, Hannibal was a CEO without a budget. His supply lines dried up. His mercenaries weren't getting paid. When Scipio finally landed in North Africa to threaten Carthage itself, the city was already financially broken. At the final Battle of Zama, Carthage was fighting on fumes. Rome won, and the terms they imposed were brutal. They stripped Carthage of its fleet, its territories, and forced them to pay massive war indemnities. They turned a superpower into a client state. But the scary part for Rome was that Carthage still succeeded. Even after losing everything, the Carthaginians pivoted again, focusing on high-intensity agriculture and trade. Within 50 years, they were rich again. This terrified the Romans. You've probably heard of Cato the Elder ending every speech with, "Carthage must be destroyed." That wasn't just blind hatred, it was economic anxiety. Rome realized that as long as Carthage existed as a commercial hub, it would always be a competitor. So in 146 BC, they didn't just defeat Carthage, they erased it. They burned the city, enslaved the population, and dismantled the competition permanently. It was a hostile takeover in the most violent sense. When we look at this story today, the parallels are uncomfortable. We still live in a world where different systems compete. You have powers that rely on global trade networks, supply chains, and soft power, essentially the Carthaginian model. And you have powers that rely on military alliances, national identity, and sheer endurance, the Roman model. The lesson of the Punic Wars isn't that one side was good and the other evil. It's that economic systems dictate military outcomes. Carthage had the better economy at the start, but it was fragile. It couldn't handle the stress test of total war because its people were customers, not citizens. Rome had a clunky economy, but it had a social contract that allowed it to survive near-death experiences. Rome eventually absorbed Carthage's lessons. They took the trade networks, they learned how to use naval power, and they learned the value of credit. In a way, to become the empire, Rome had to become a little bit like Carthage. History doesn't repeat itself perfectly, but the mechanics remain the same. The side with the most money doesn't always win. The side that can endure the most pain and keep its society held together while the treasury drains. That is the side that usually remains standing when the smoke clears. Carthage bet on capital. Rome bet on cohesion. And in the end, cohesion bought the empire.